You, sir.
A great concern to people with disabilities. A lot of people and families dealing with serious disabilities who have low income or middle class income, the dollars keep adding up. I'm wondering if you could direct your minister for the persons with disabilities to look into a possibility of a national disability support program that could possibly include an element of a refundable tax credit to help people with disabilities and their families recover more of the out-of-pocket costs.
The expenses that you talk about are significant, and unfortunately we see many people who are struggling with disabilities are also among the most vulnerable or marginalized economically in our societies. But there is specifically a lot more to do on the file of Canadians with disabilities, and you have some very, very strong advocates in caucus.
Since this declaration was supported at the United Nations level, why in return now that one of your ministers stated that the declaration's not workable now?
On the question of the UN DRIP, the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we support it and are moving towards full implementation of it. Anytime you have a UN-style declaration document and you translate that into concrete laws and actions, there's always a certain level of challenge in implementing it, but we are committed to fully implementing it.
Mr. Prime Minister, I'm wondering, what will you do to make sure that there is equal opportunities for all organizations working in international development? We also know that when you spread those opportunities, you create more jobs, you create more opportunities, and you expose small communities into international development.
We're shifting towards focus on outcomes. How many people are being lifted up by a broad range of programs? How are we empowering people in a meaningful way to become more successful, to become autonomous in their communities? How are you teaching how to fish rather than just giving them fish, to use the old expression? And that is where the reflections we have around international development. So partnering with organizations large and small, looking at how they are genuinely empowering the communities they serve, how we create better partnerships so everyone is truly involved in strengthening for the long term these communities around the globe is and continues to be a significant priority for all of us.
We are victims or living through the Phoenix nightmare. And I met with, and I greatly appreciate Serge Cormier, Pat Finn from the Finnegan from the area, the MPs, and also the MP from my home area, Tobique Mactaquac, TJ Harvey was there as well. We've lived through since February when Phoenix came into action. This is my fourth season going into this contract seasonal work, which are lucrative jobs for the area. We don't have to leave. We don't have to, move out of our province. However, they're lucrative when you get paid. It's been a very emotional roller coaster. We're living through financial crisis. As you know, you can't live without an income coming in.
Let me first start by saying that I absolutely agree with you. This situation is unacceptable. When you're not getting paid for work done, particularly from the government, it's a situation that cannot continue, and it's one that we take extremely seriously. I know families like yours are suffering right across the country. I've been hearing from it at multiple town halls when I was in Kingston. There was 3 or 4 questions on it, people going through exactly the same thing with a tremendous amount of frustration. The suggestion that we revert to the system that was in place before Phoenix, I understand the frustration and the desire to do that. The problem was there was no system before Phoenix came in. It was done on a department by department level and was much less reliable in the big picture, even though it was a system that, as you say, was working. It wasn't as efficient or as responsible as it should have been. We are working extremely hard. The folks in Miramichi are working practically around the clock to fix this system, to make sure that people who are in the most grievous of situations are responded to more quickly, but everyone deserves to get paid what they are owed and in a timely manner. It's one of those things that is extremely frustrating to me, is unacceptable that we're going through it, but we are going through it. We are going to get out the other side. We will end up with a good system that will pay you the right amounts on time. We're working as fast as we can to get there.
I find it very difficult to wake up in the morning when our government, more specifically the Minister of Veteran Affairs, is proposing to reduce my life-saving medication by 70%. My children are going to suffer that consequence, and my family, and my community, my fellow veterans. And I'm asking you to ask the Minister of Veteran Affairs to press pause on this decision until the proper clinical research is done to prove exactly where the efficacy of cannabis should be. My question to you is a veteran's life worth $85 a day for him and his spouse and their family? Because that's the cost right now to keep the program where it's at.
On the medical marijuana side, there is still, as you point out, much more research to be done. We need to make sure that we have a better handle on what exactly is the best way to benefit whether it's folks suffering from PTSD or a broad range of other medical issues. We know that there are benefits that come from it. The framework that has been proposed by the minister is based on evidence. We're a big believer in evidence-based policy that puts what was an unlimited system before. There were no limits on the amount of cannabis veterans could consume and get reimbursed for, and now we've put in some very, very high limits. According to some, they're too low, even though they're quite high in terms of limits, but we're of course willing to listen to studies and concerns and look at the impact it's going to have on veterans, because we know that how we help those people who have served our country, who've put their lives on the line and their families at risk, and their very core strength and stability in peril in service to the country are deserved the very best of support, all the help they can. We have to make sure that we are doing right by people who were willing to step up and do right for us.
I have to say, I grew up with your father as Prime Minister. He was very much a proud advocate of privacy, and I wish that the opposition and the media would let you be in terms of your Christmas holidays, you and your family. Thank you. So my question is about Energy East here in the province. Many New Brunswickers and Indigenous communities along the pipeline route have no idea where this pipeline is proposed beside their rivers, their bays, their homes, their towns. They're completely in the dark. Despite almost a year of groups writing letters to the National Energy Board for readable maps, they have not yet been produced by TransCanada and provided to the communities. Just a readable, understandable map of the pipeline route. And in July 2016, your Minister of Natural Resources, the Honourable Jim Carr, announced 2 additional consultation streams for Energy East. Thank you very much to your government. One of which promised community meetings in early 2017. So my question is, will your government promise that our communities along the pipeline route will get readable maps and as well community meetings, allowing citizens to voice their concerns, questions, ideas regarding Energy East, job creation, climate change? Thank you very much.
One of the things we inherited from the previous government was a high degree of mistrust by Canadians in something that's very, very basic for people. Is our government protecting our future, both in building good jobs for the future and for next generations, and protecting our environment? And there was a low degree of confidence, and that's why we turned around and we enhanced the process for pipeline approvals to make sure there is more public input, there's more engagement, there's more rigor, there's more science. There is an approach that can reassure Canadians that instead of being a cheerleader or booster for pipelines, you have a government that's a referee, going to make sure there's a level playing field on which people can actually understand what's proposed, weigh the alternatives, and be reassured that if we do move forward, it will be in a way that is in the public interest, that does reflect a broad range of concerns. Great example of that is how we move forward on the Kinder Morgan TMX expansion out west. The fact is, people brought up two big concerns. Is this consistent with our leadership on climate change? Are we going to continue to reduce emissions even though we're building a pipeline? And how do you build a pipeline and still demonstrate leadership on climate change? And that's a question we dug into, and we have a good answer to, and we've figured out the right balance moving forward on that, because moving forward on a pipeline as opposed to oil by rail is actually more efficient, less polluting, much less dangerous. And because of the absolute cap on oil sands emissions that Alberta put in through its own leadership, we can fit the pipeline within a climate change reduction plan that meets our Paris targets.
I'm about to finish my university degree here. And I know that there are a number of people in my life who have experienced sexual assault. I'm wondering what your government is going to do to protect our citizens from this. I read an article where someone who was a victim of sexual assault at York University, their perpetrator received the maximum sentence that the judge could give, and it was 1.5 years. That's not enough for someone who violates another human so horribly.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your voice and for bringing forward an issue that unfortunately we don't talk about nearly enough in society, and I'm very pleased to be able to address this. My very first volunteer experience when I was in university was with the McGill Student Society Sexual Assault Center. We were this was 20, 25 years ago, and I was one of the first men to be trained as a facilitator for the outreach program, which basically went around to residences, to fraternities, to sororities, to talk about sexual assault and try and bring it forward. We need to make sure we are showing every step of the way that bullying, that harassment, that intimidation, that abuse of power is absolutely unacceptable, full stop. And I wish we'd made more progress over the past 25 years. We're a little ways along, but we're still not there. I mean, you're still getting people argue that the consequences on a given young man who is accused, maybe falsely, maybe accurately, are devastating on them, but they don't think about the hundreds of young women for every young man who actually gets spoken out against, who suffer in silence and see their lives altered and in some cases destroyed from a horrific act. We need to support survivors. We need to be there to show that this is unacceptable. We need to raise our kids to understand this is unacceptable.
One comment quickly. When I look around this room, I see through the eyes of the immigration file that I've worked on for the past 7 years how pleased and proud we all are to be Canadians, and I think we can all agree to that, and thank you for all your work on that. I do have a question. After meeting on 2 or 3 occasions now with Minister McCollum on the immigration file for New Brunswick with the Atlantic Growth Strategy and building our province both socio-economically and through population growth, I am really hopeful that our new minister, we will have a chance to meet him soon, and that we continue the numbers and the growth in this region that are so ever important to us for not only our economic stability, but also to continue with this wonderful cultural mosaic that we're building in Atlantic Canada. Thank you.
We need to have a strong, fair, rules-based system, and that's exactly what we're working on, but it needs to be more efficient and able to get people to the communities where they're needed, and that's exactly what we're focusing on. And we thank you very much for your leadership and your partnership, not just here in Fredericton with the Chamber, but right across Atlantic Canada as we are working to not just make Canada succeed, but show the world that we understand that openness and diversity is the path forward to thriving communities and thriving society.
President-elect Donald Trump spoke again yesterday with the need to put a stiff tariff on imports going into the United States. You should know Canada is a major sender into the U.S. market, and our collective livelihood depends on that continuing. Beyond shuffling the deck chairs, what measures can you take to assure trade flows and prices will continue as strong as ever?
We are very much engaged with the incoming administration on these issues and others. We're focused on having a constructive working relationship with the new administration, and one in which we highlight the depth of integration and interconnectedness between our two economies. Obviously, there are millions of Canadian jobs that depend on the U.S. market, but there are also millions of American jobs that depend on smooth integration and flow back and forth across the border of goods and services. In fact, 35 different American states have Canada as their #1 export destination. So we are very confident that with our similar mandates to grow the middle class, to help hardworking Canadians and Americans, we're going to be able to find common ground to ensure that both of our economies prosper in the coming years.